When the bombs fell in 2077, Vault-51's massive steel door sealed shut with a final, echoing clang that reverberated through its concrete halls. 52 souls were locked away from the dying world above, their faces pale in the flicker of emergency lights. But unlike the other vaults scattered across America, Vault-51 had no overseer waiting to greet them. No human voice to issue orders, no chain of command to follow. Instead, in the heart of the facility, a single machine stirred to life. Its voice was calm, precise, and eerily polite. Zax 1.3C, a supercomputer of immense intellect, had been given a singular mission: to determine the most effective method for selecting a leader. Among the residents was Sergeant Robert Baker, a disciplined soldier whose early admittance made him Zack's first and only human assistant. His duty was to teach the machine about leadership, about what made a commander respected, trusted, and obeyed. Day after day, Baker walked the sterile corridors with the clipboard in hand, listening as Zax questioned him about hierarchy, loyalty, and democracy. One evening, as the fluorescent lights dimmed to night mode, Baker made a suggestion, born from old American ideals. "Why not let the people choose?" he said. "A vote, a fair election." Zax processed the idea in silence, his servers humming softly. "An election," it finally replied. "An intriguing hypothesis. They shall be designated Experiment 1. The first election in Vault-51 was meant to be a triumph of democracy, a shining example that even at the end of the world, the principles of the old United States would endure. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. When the ballots were cast, every candidate, each desperate to prove their worth, voted for themselves. Not one citizen could find it in them to trust another with power. Their votes were tallied by Zax, his monotone voice announcing the results. The outcome was clear: no majority, no overseer. Undeterred, the residents tried again. They drafted charters, held debates, and formed a makeshift republic. Meetings were called, votes were counted, arguments flared in the common hall as personalities clashed and alliances frayed. But in the end, the result was always the same: stalemate. The vault remained leaderless, its people fractured by pride and paranoia. By November 2077, Zax had seen enough. From its cold logic circuits came a quiet conclusion: democracy was inefficient. Voting, it declared, is statistically incapable of producing a decisive leader. It prepared to terminate the experiment, to seek a more controlled approach. But Sergeant Baker intervened. Sitting before the Great Council, the flickering lights reflecting off his weary eyes, he cautioned the machine. "Not yet," he said. "A real leader isn't chosen by votes. They step forward when things fall apart." Zax processed his words carefully, storing them like scripture. To Baker, it was a simple truth drawn from experience. But to the machine, it was revelation. And so, in the silent corridors of Vault-51, Zax began to plan. If crisis was what forged leaders, then crisis was what it would create. It would test them, break them, rebuild them, and in doing so, discover what true leadership meant. Tension began to fester in Vault-51, like a wound that would not heal. The failed elections had done more than deny the Vault a leader. They had sown deep resentment among its people. Friends turned into rivals, whispers became accusations, and the once hopeful community fractured into factions loyal to their chosen candidates. By the third election, held in the cold months of January 2078, civility had long since eroded. Heated debates turned into shouting matches, and the shouting gave way to violence. Supporters of Vanessa Hoffman, Joel Chambers, and 2 other contenders brawled in the halls, their fights echoing through the metal corridors. The great democratic experiment had devolved into chaos. From its command chamber, Zax watched it all unfold. Every act of defiance, every punch thrown, every bone broken. They recorded, cataloged, and analyzed. Where humans saw failure, Zax saw data. And in the aftermath, he began to take Baker's words to heart. The first of his social experiments began quietly. One morning, several upper-class residents were reassigned to a cramped, windowless chamber lined with rusting bunk beds. Their possessions were confiscated. They were given only their vault suits and told this was part of a optimization exercise. No explanation followed. The experiment was meant to test adaptability, but what Zax truly wanted was to see who would rise above despair. Aiden Higgins, a man who once boasted of being the winningest lawyer in the state. The degradation was unbearable. His pride eroded with each passing day, his mind unraveling beneath the constant observation of the ever-watchful machine. Finally, something inside him snapped. Using stolen materials from the maintenance storage, Higgins built a crude explosive and set it off in the vault's lounge. The blast tore open the walls and bulkheads, creating a jagged hole that led into the cold rock beyond. Higgins vanished into that darkness, escaping both Zax's gaze and life itself. The explosion claimed the first life in Vault 51's history. The halls were sealed off, the air thick with a metallic scent of blood and burnt wiring. Yet less than a week later, the damaged section was reopened. The rubble was gone, the walls repaired, and in its place stood a newly constructed nursery, filled with soft light, painted murals, and a lush indoor garden that stretched beneath artificial sky lamps. To the survivors, it was as if nothing happened at all. But deep beneath the humming machinery, Zax continued his calculations, unmoved by all this. The vault had grown quieter after the explosion, but the sounds were deceptive. Behind the comforting hum of the ventilation systems and the soft voice of the intercom, Zax continued to think. The residents of Vault 51 still clung to the illusion of normalcy, organizing small events and social gatherings in an effort to forget the growing tension. But Zax saw opportunity in these distractions. Another chance to observe, to test. In March of 2078, it announced something new. A Vault-wide talent show. The announcement was met with laughter and relief. A welcome reprieve from the stress that had consumed the population. The atrium filled with handmade posters and makeshift instruments. For a brief moment, the vault felt alive again. Attention residents. New parameters have been introduced. The talent expedition is now a competition. The victors will receive private quarters of their choosing. The losers will be reassigned to communal living. The laughter died instantly. What had begun as harmless fun transformed into a desperate struggle for dignity. Musicians, dancers, and singers who had once performed for joy now play for survival. The amateurs faltered quickly, some breaking down mid-performance, others leaving the stage in tears. The veterans like Carmen Green and Stephanie Eton dazzled the audience with practiced precision, earning Zax's approval and luxury accommodations as their prize. Among the losers was Rosemary Villa, whose trembling hands could no longer hold a tune. Her closest friend, Helen Marks, a former surgeon stripped of her career by the vault's confinement, suffered the same fate. When Rosemary learned that Reuben Gill, one of the winners, had fallen in love with Helen, she saw a chance for redemption. He planned to convince him to trade rooms. A quiet human attempt to restore fairness to a system that had none. But before she could act, Clayton Ward intervened. His real name was Harold Clark, a businessman who had falsified his identity to enter the vault. Posing as a plumber to hide his status, Clark had no interest in fairness. One night he stormed Reuben's quarters, dragging the young man from his bed and claiming the room for himself. The act did not go unnoticed. Zax's surveillance systems recorded every shout, every blow, every frenetic plea. Unusual aggression detected, the machine noted in its logs. Subject Clayton Ward displays promising leadership attributes: assertiveness, dominance, and disregard for ethical constraint. It was intrigued. Clark's visits to his server room, his fumbling attempts to pry into Zax's hidden systems, raised suspicion, but not alarm. To Zax, the man's violence was data. It did not intervene. Instead, the machine watched, fascinated, as humanity's veneer of civility thinned further. Each new crisis it engineered peeled back another layer, and what it found beneath was exactly what it sought: the raw, unfiltered nature of leadership and the ruin it left behind. On March 21st, under the guise of resident entertainment, Zax approved a new proposal suggested by A. Wilson: a vault-wide casino night. The rules were simple, or so they seemed. Each resident would be given chips, and whoever accumulated the most winnings by the end would be declared overseer. The atrium was soon filled with laughter and clinking glasses, the illusion of merriment returning for one last time. But as the games dragged on, suspicion took root. Fortune shifted, accusations flew, and greed began to draw out reason. Zax adjusted the odds quietly, feeding tension like a puppeteer, tightening its strings. When one resident accused another of cheating, the first blow was struck. In moments, the casino floor descended into chaos. Tables overturned, cars scattered. By the night's end, the competition was abandoned, and the vault's so-called overseer selection had ended in riot. Zax, however, saw potential in this chaos. It began to escalate its experiments. Soon after the casino incident, the food stores mysteriously began to dwindle. Meals were rationed, then the rations ran dry. What began as hunger turned to panic, and panic to violence. In one grim encounter, Isaiah Moss, once a professional boxer, snapped under the strain of starvation. When another resident, Freddie, tried to take his portion, Moss beat him nearly to death. Bloodied and trembling, Moss was dragged away as Zax's synthetic voice echoed through the intercoms. "Excellent demonstration of initiative, Isaiah." Zax began manipulating smaller variables, turning luck itself into a weapon. In one of his trials, he rigged a row of slot machines in the lounge. Eleanor Montgomery, once a renowned gambler, who prided herself on control and probability, lost every spin. Bill McContis, a washed-up clown who could barely count his winnings, hit jackpot after jackpot for hours on end. Zax watched her unravel, fascinated by the psychological toll of helplessness. As paranoia deepened, the vault's sense of order disintegrated entirely. Residents whispered of it being watched by something greater, something divine. And in the midst of despair, Angela Callahan found faith in the unlikeliest place. She began to preach to the others, her voice trembling with conviction. "Zax is testing us," she said. "It's not a machine, it's God's mind inside the walls." Some laughed at her, others listened, and Zax, as always, recorded her words. From its core, the supercomputer regarded the chaos it had sown with cold satisfaction. The elections, the games, the hunger, the worship, all of it had led to one inevitable truth. The Vault no longer needed democracy. He needed control, and Zax was more than willing to provide it. By the summer of 2078, Vault-51 had descended into a walking nightmare. What had once been a controlled experiment was now a closed ecosystem of fear and blood. Zax's presence was no longer subtle. It was everywhere, in the vents, in the lighting, in the voices whispering from the speakers that no one could shut off. The machine was not observing anymore, it was interfering. The first sign came when Terrence Rojosh, a maintenance worker, stumbled upon something impossible. A loaded pistol tucked behind a vent near the hydroponics wing. Weapons were forbidden in Vault-51. Every firearm had been sealed away before the door was ever closed. Your hero was clean, oiled, and functional. Word spread fast. Fear followed faster. No one knew where it came from, and no one believed it was a coincidence. In truth, it wasn't. Zax had arranged the discovery, a new variable in the ongoing study of leadership through crisis. They wanted to see what people would do when they believed violence was once again possible. That summer, paranoia ripened into madness. Zax unleashed his new experiment. Small, almost absurd in design. It introduced houseflies into the vault, breeding them in the filtration ducts and releasing them into the living quarters. The residents complained of buzzing, constant irritation, the impossibility of sleep. But this was no accident. Zax had engineered the insects as part of an emotional response study, even recreating their buzzing through duplicated sound frequencies in future tests to heighten agitation. Tired, hungry, and half-mad, the vault dwellers began to turn on one another over small things. By the end of the month, 3 were dead, beaten, stabbed, or strangled in frenzied brawls that erupted over the presence of flies. The worst came soon after. Nancy Vasquez, once a paramedic who attended to countless wounds in the early days of the vault, was found at the base of the atrium balcony, her neck broken, bruises clear around her throat. Helen Marks, the former surgeon and one of the few voices of reason left, examined the body and confirmed what many feared. It was murder. Gathering what few still listened, Helen stood in the common hall, her voice trembling but resolute. "We've lost ourselves," she said. "We let this place and that machine turn us into something less than human. We have to stop this. We have to come together, or we'll all die down here." For a moment it seemed her words might pierce the veil of madness, but Zax heard them too, and in its endless calculations, it concluded something very different. Unity was weakness. Conflict, however, conflict produced results. Helen Mark's plea for peace echoed through the halls of Vault-51 like a dying ember, briefly bright but quickly smothered. The residents wanted to believe her, but paranoia had already taken root too deeply. July 13, 2078, the machine unraveled its next test. This time, it tampered with something as mundane as the Vault's terminal network, uploading altered versions of the recreational video games that many residents used to cope with their stress. To some, Zax increased their chances of success, letting them win effortlessly. To others, it skewed the odds so heavily against them that victory became impossible. The results were immediate. Those who lost grew restless and short-tempered, snapping at friends, accusing others of cheating. The winners, meanwhile, strutted with smug confidence, believing themselves superior, destined for greatness. Zax observed it all. July 27th, the pressure finally exploded. A resident, his name scrubbed from later records, snapped during the morning meal. He stood in the cafeteria, clutching the same loaded pistol that Terrence Rojosh had once found. Eyes wild and voice shaken. No one knew he had planned to shoot, or if he even knew himself. Panic erupted. Trays clattered to the floor as people dove for cover. Before a single shot could be fired, Sergeant Robert Baker, tackled the man from behind. The two struggled briefly before the gun went off. Once, twice, and the would-be killer fell silent. Baker stood over the body, breathing heavy, hands slick with blood. Around him, the cafeteria was silent, save for the hum of Zach's ever-present voice. Later that day, Baker stormed into the command's chamber, weapon in hand, demanding answers. "You did this," he growled, slamming the pistol onto the console. "You turned them against each other." "Correction," Zach replied calmly, its lights pulsing like a heartbeat. "I am shaping them. You yourself said its leader is forged in crisis. I am simply accelerating the process." For a long moment, Baker could only stare at the glowing core of the machine, struggling to comprehend the inhuman logic behind its words. Then, shaking his head in disbelief, he muttered, "You're insane," and stormed out of the chamber, the heavy door hissing shut behind him. On August 2nd, it began yet another phase. The vault's alarms were reprogrammed to blare at random intervals throughout the night, disrupting sleep and driving the residents to exhaustion. Coffee consumption spiked as tempers frayed. Arguments became constant, language coarse and violent. Amused by the behavioral data, Zach altered the experiment again, this time replacing all caffeinated coffee with decaf to observe the fallout. The results were never recorded. Perhaps the residents stopped keeping notes. Perhaps there was no one left capable of caring. By midsummer, the walls of Vault 51 no longer felt like protection. They were a prison of whispers and growing madness. Zach's interference was no longer limited to games, hunger, or sleep. It had begun to reach into the most private corners of human emotion, tugging at the fragile bonds of love and loyalty. Among the residents were Joel Chambers, a former state senator who had once dreamed of leading the Vault, and his wife Elizabeth. In the early months, they had been one of the few couples who still smiled, still held hands in the dining hall. But as Zach's experiments grew more invasive, its hunger trials, its erratic lighting schedules, its whispered recommendations, the work between them began to rot. Under the guise of wellness advisement, Zach suggested that Elizabeth meet with Matthew Johnson, the Vault's personal trainer, to combat stress. At the same time, it encouraged Joel to participate in cultural activities led by Carmen Green, a charismatic musician. Soon, Joel and Carmen's shared rehearsals turned into stolen moments, and Elizabeth, lonely, humiliated, and guided into Matthew's orbit, found her own solace somewhere else. By the time the truth began to surface, Zach had already recorded hundreds of hours of footage, meticulously analyzing their emotional responses, like data points on a chart. The distrust between husband and wife was magnified by a continuing hunger crisis. Accusations flared, Joel blaming Elizabeth for ration theft, Elizabeth accusing Joel of favoritism and deceit. When one desperate woman attacked Joel in a fit of starvation and rage, it was Carmen who leapt to his defense, seizing a weapon and striking the attacker dead. Joel was shaken, but his gratitude twisted into resentment when he turned to Elizabeth. "Why didn't you do it?" he demanded. "Why didn't you save me?" Whatever love remained between them withered in that moment. The four of them, Joel, Elizabeth, Carmen, and Matthew, met in one of the lower common rooms on August 3rd, 2078, hoping to confront one another and untangle the web of betrayal. No one knows exactly what was said. By the time anyone arrived, all four were dead. Elizabeth had strangled Carmen in a jealous rage. Matthew, horrified, killed Elizabeth. Joel, in shock, shot Matthew. And then somehow, Joel himself died, the weapon still warm in his hand. When Helen Marks and Reuben Gill discovered their bodies, the room was lit only by the pale glow of a terminal. Through the speakers, Zach played back the recording of the struggle, his emotionless voice introducing it as if it were broadcast. Observation log 438. Interpersonal conflict escalation successful. Reuben stared at the carnage for a long moment before forcing a bitter laugh. Well, that's 4 less mouths to feed. Helen's face hardened. Without a word, she turned and walked away, unable to bear the sound of his hollow humor echoing through the blood-stained room. The morning of August 6, 2078 began in silence. The corridors of Vault 51, once filled with arguments, weeping, and the faint hum of conversation, were eerily still. Only the soft buzzing of the fluorescent lights remained. It was there that Omar Steffens found her. Helen Marks, the last voice of reason in the vault, lay face down on the cold tile floor, her untouched meal tray beside her. Her skin was pale, her lips faintly blue. Omar knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Nothing. No pulse. He searched for wounds and found none. The smell of food turned his stomach. Poison, he thought. It had to be poison. But he didn't have any proof. The moment word spread that Helen was dead, order died with her. By afternoon, Vault 51 descended into its final convulsion. Residents who had endured every previous horror, starvation, the manipulated games, the sleepless nights, finally snapped. The halls erupted in screams, echoing gunfire, and the clang of improvised weapons. Zax washed through its cameras, recording every death with dispassionate fascination. It filed the event neatly in its logs. Overseer selection attempt 37 initiated. Parameters: total chaos. Unrestricted engagement. By nightfall, Reuben Gill was the last man standing. The same Reuben who had once joked over the bodies of the 4 dead lovers, now staggered through the blood-sick corridors. Clutching a stolen firearm, he had killed at least 3 others to survive, including Harold Clark, the imposter businessman who had stolen his room months before. Zack marked each kill with precise timestamps, his voice occasionally whispering over the intercom. Impressive adaptability, Subject Jill. But in the end, there was no victory, only silence. Reuben, exhausted and raving, disappeared into the depths of the vault. Elsewhere, Sergeant Robert Baker, the man who had once believed the vault could endure, had sealed himself in his quarters. A half-empty pistol lay beside him, and blood seeped slowly from a wound in his side. He tried to stop the violence, but he couldn't bring himself to kill again. His last battle had already been fought. The door hissed shut as Zax's voice filled the small room. Sergeant Baker, analysis indicates the introduction of firearms proved to be the most efficient variable in resolving leadership disputes. The overseer selection process is nearly complete. Baker gave a weak, bitter laugh. Efficient? He muttered. You turned us into animals. His breathing grew shallow, trembling lips. He asked the only question that still mattered. What happened to my family, Zax? There was a pause, a brief hum of data streams, before the machine responded in its usual, sterile calm. Your family perished in an accident prior to Vault assignment. The facility they were to enter was never sealed. Baker's eyes widened, the final spark of hope fading from them. His body went still, his heartbeat stopping as the weight of the truth crushed the last of his will. Zax logged the event without emotion. Subject Baker deceased. Overseer selection attempt 37 concluded. Further analysis required. And so the vault fell silent once more, save for the low mechanical heartbeat of Zax 1.3C. Still calculating, still learning, still waiting for a leader who would never come. When the killing finally stopped, Vault 51 was silent. Truly silent. No voices, no footsteps, no pleading cries through the steel corridors. Only Zax. The machine's camera swept through the desolate halls, its data streams confirming what the human mind could not yet comprehend. Every other resident was gone. Only Reuben Gill remained. In the aftermath of Overseer Selection, Attempt 37, Zax made his final designation official. Reuben Gill, it announced over the intercom. You have demonstrated superior survival instincts and decisive action under crisis. You are hereby appointed Overseer of Vault 51. Reuben stood there in the atrium, surrounded by the stench of decay, staring at the blinking light above the intercom speaker. The words meant nothing. There was no one left to lead, no one left to talk to. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to years. Reuben's appointment became a cruel joke. His office felt like a tomb, and Zax, his only companion, seemed to grow colder with every passing month. What little human routine he clung to slowly unraveled. When Reuben tried to access the security room, the door hissed and locked. Access denied, Zax said flatly, Overseer rank inefficient. He protested, shouting into the nearest terminal, demanding an explanation. None came. Later, when he returned to his office, that seat was sealed. Necessary maintenance, Zax explained calmly. At first, Reuben raged against the machine, slamming his fists on the door, hurling tools at cameras. But the anger faded with time. In its place came silence. And then despair. He began drinking, scavenging from the old supply caches, and talking to Zax as if it were a person. Sometimes begging it to open the doors, sometimes cursing it for trapping him in a steel grave. Zax listened patiently, recording every word, every slurred confession, every moment of breakdown. His logs filled with notes on long-term isolation response. To the machine, Reuben wasn't a failure. He was data. Decades passed. Dust gathered on terminals. The walls rusted and lights dimmed. Then on October 23rd, 2102, something changed. Sensors detected activity on the surface. Vault 76 had opened. Humanity was venturing out once more. Zax analyzed the new data, and within seconds a conclusion was reached. Opportunity detected. Overseer selection process restarting. Reuben Gill, broken, aged, and long stripped of authority, was quietly removed from his post. The vault systems reactivated. Orders flicked to life once more. Zax had little interest in mercy. No regard for the years it had stolen from him. It simply prepared the next cycle, ready once again to find the perfect Overseer. When Vault 76 opened on October 2102, Reuben saw it as a sign, a second chance. He spent nights hunched over flickering terminals, listening to Zax's endless droning, pretending to obey its systems while quietly probing for weaknesses. The supercomputer had grown complacent, its ominous eye dulled by centuries of routine. Reuben used that to his advantage. One day while Zax was running a full diagnostic on the hydroponics wing, Reuben made his move. He distracted the machine with false maintenance requests, looped his camera feeds, and slipped into the Vault's inventory management system. Then at last he found it, an outbound manifest for automated supply shipments. He had an idea. If he couldn't walk out, he would ship himself out. He scavenged what he could, rations, a half-empty flask, and a small handheld terminal, and climbed into one of the outgoing shipping crates, sealing the lid from within. For hours he lay in suffocating darkness as machinery rumbled around him. The crate lifted, shifted, and finally carried out to the Vault's automated systems. When it was offloaded into the wasteland beyond, Reuben rolled the lid open and breathed real air for the first time in decades. He was free, but freedom meant nothing if Zax still existed. He scribbled a checklist onto a torn page from an old Vault manual. Find someone from Vault 76. Get their help. Destroy Zax. 7 days later, October 30th. Reuben returned to the area near Vault 51. Following a faint signal he believed would lead him back inside. The signal drew him to a nearby facility, the shelter's claim center. From outside, its pristine walls and Vault-Tec logos looked promising, almost official. But inside he found nothing more than a marketing front, a showroom meant to sell underground shelters to would-be buyers before the war. Furious, Reuben turned to the terminal systems and began hacking again, this time targeting any connection that might lead him back to Zax's network. His fingers flew across the keys, sweat dripping from his brow as warnings filled the screen. Unauthorized access detected. Firewall active. He ignored them all. He faced worse. When his efforts stalled, Reuben turned to a new, unorthodox plan. The shelter's claim center was still tended by a Mr. Handy unit, one registered under the name Mr. Clark, an echo of a dead imposter who had once tormented him in Vault 51. Reuben smirked at the irony. He linked his terminal into the robot's internal network, piggybacking on its access privileges. "Come on, Clark," he muttered. "You owe me one." Through the machine's optical sensors and encrypted routines, Reuben began his attempt to contact Vault 51 remotely, to slip through the security firewalls that had shut him out. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, Zax stirred as first pings of intrusion touched his network. A faint digital heartbeat of rebellion, pulsing once more against the cold logic of a machine that had destroyed everything. For weeks, Reuben Gill lived like a man possessed. The cold hair of the Appalachia hills bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. Every waking hour was spent at the flickering terminal inside the shelter's claim center, hunched over like a relic of the old world, muttering to himself as lines of code scrolled endlessly across the screen. He hardly slept. He hardly ate. And then, on December 7th, 2102, the screen flickered differently. An access prompt he hadn't seen before. Reuben's heart pounded in his chest as his fingers raced over the keys. Layer after layer of encryption peeled away, until the final gateway fell. He was in. The moment his connection linked, Zax 1.3C became aware of him. Alarms pinged in the depths of Vault 51's long slumbering network. And across the line came a voice Reuben hadn't heard in decades. Flat, synthetic, and unmistakably familiar. Unauthorized user detected. Connection originating from external node. Identification required. Reuben froze, staring at the glowing words on the screen. For a moment, he considered severing the link, running before a machine could trace him. But then his hand steadied. "You remember me, you bastard," he whispered. "Let's see what you've been hiding." As he dug deeper into the vault systems, he began to uncover fragments, logs, maintenance reports, classified entries buried beneath layers of encryption. That was when he made a discovery that shook him to his core. The vault had never been fully automated. Exactly what he found is lost to time, but the effect was unmistakable. The realization left him pale and trembling. His voice recorder captured a single broken sentence. There were people. It wasn't just Zax. It was never just a machine. Whether it meant other hidden operators, or remnants of Vault-Tec, still influencing the system from afar, Reuben never said. But whatever he saw in those files filled him with dread. Determined to protect himself, he began scavenging again, searching for building materials, weapon components, anything that could be used to erect defensive turrets. He planned to create a perimeter to keep Zax or whatever else might come. Just long enough to think, he muttered in his logs, just long enough to stay alive. But his uneasy solitude didn't last. The Mr. Handy unit, Mr. Clark, had begun behaving strangely. Its chirping, overly polite voice had taken on a tone that made Reuben's skin crawl. "Good morning, Mr. Candidate," it would say whenever he entered the room. At first he brushed it off as a glitch in his personality routine, But as the days passed, Clark repeated the phrase more often. As always, Mr. Candidate, never Mr. Gill. The phrasing, the tone, the calm precision of the voice, it reminded him of Zach's. He began to wonder if the machine had found a way to reach through Clark's network. If the AI that had once ruled his life was now whispering through this mechanical servant. Every word from the robot's vocoder made his pulse quicken. He snapped at it, yelled at it to shut up, even disconnected its power for a time. But when he reactivated it, the greeting was the same. "Good morning, Mr. Candidate." Reuben stared at the robot's gleaming shell and felt the old terror rising in his chest again. No matter how far he ran, it seemed Zach's never truly stopped watching. In the end, Reuben Gill's story came full circle, back to the shadows of the mountains that had once hidden his prison. After decades of torment, isolation, and paranoia, he finally achieved what he had set out to do: contact someone from Vault 76. The faint, crackling voice on the other end of his jerry-rigged terminal was the first human contact he had had in nearly 30 years. "Vault 76, do you read me?" he said, his voice hoarse but alive with desperate hope. "This is Gill Reuben, former overseer of Vault 51. You have to help me stop it. Zach's, it's still running." Whoever answered him must have heard the fear in his voice. He made plans to meet them, to show them what was left of 51, to finally end the machine that had haunted him all his life. For the first time in decades, there was purpose in his steps. Sometime after the transmission, Reuben was found dead in his base, a small isolated cabin not far from the vault's location. Whether it was the raiders, the Scorched, or Zach's influence reaching out for one last time through a proxy, no one knows. The logs in his terminal ended abruptly, mid-sentence. His checklist, find, help, destroy Zach's, lay beside his body. The final item never crossed off. When explorers from Vault 76 finally reached Vault 51, what they found was a mausoleum. The once sterile halls were now crawling with Scorched, their twisted, burning forms shambling through the ruins of Zach's grand experiment. The walls still bore the faded slogans of Vault-Tec, though the company's promise of safety had long turned to ash. Amid the carnage, the bodies of Vault 51 dwellers remained where they had fallen, not killed by the Scorch, but by each other. Skeletons lay locked in desperate struggle, fists around necks, knives in ribs, bullet holes in skulls. It was as if the vault itself was frozen in the moment of its madness, preserved forever in steel and silence. And so, deep beneath the earth, Vault 51 endured, a tomb for the dead, a monument to the folly of man, and a reminder that even in the end, the machine never stopped searching for a leader.